On today's show, we are looking at the NBA champion Toronto Raptors, looking at their players from a dynasty point of view. Michael Bolton.
Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com and at Yahoo Sports Australia. And you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode is also brought to you by Built Bar, the best tasting protein bars you can find. Go to builtbar.com and use that promo code Locked On for $10 off your first purchase. Today, we are looking at the NBA champion Toronto Raptors. We're looking at them from a dynasty point of view, their younger players, what we can expect as we move forward. So let's talk about those guys now. Let's start with a bloke whose free agency is really interesting coming up, and that is Big Freddles. Freddie VanVleet, who was amazing this season. I wasn't sure at the start of the year whether he would start or whether he would come off the bench, but I knew that he was a significantly undervalued fantasy target, but he blew my expectations away. So far, when the season ended, he was the 30th ranked player. He played 36 minutes a night, significantly higher than I think anyone expected. He averaged 18 points, 4 rebounds, 6.5 assists, 2.7 triples, and almost 2 steals. So a lot of that ranking is the high steal number, but he's always had a pretty good steal rate. And he is a guy that a couple of years ago, some advanced projection systems really did rate him as a potential diamond in the rough type player, and we've seen that play out the last 2 years. What happens with him in free agency is going to be really interesting. I think that he's going to get a pretty decent sized deal, and so much of this depends on what happens with the cap. But even if he stays in Toronto, I think we should be looking at him as a really high valued asset. Obviously, he's playing alongside Kyle Lowry, but Lowry is not going to last forever. Shit, he's already 34. A year, 2, VanVleet takes over as the starting point guard, and I can absolutely see in VanVleet's future a 20-point per game season and 8 assists per game season. That'll probably mean his steals drop off. He does have to improve some of that 2-point shooting. 43% is not going to cut it, but 39 from 3 is really strong. And the 3.5 free throw attempts, I think that's got room to improve as well. So I think that there is absolutely a chance he can have a top 20 fantasy season, and that doesn't matter whether he goes to another team and takes over and runs the show next year, or he stays in Toronto and does that in 2 years' time. He is 26 years of age, so while there is some bright future coming up here for Fred, I think in the next three to 4 seasons, we're not talking about an 8 or 9 year type of really sustained run. It might only be 2 years. So if you're looking to acquire him in Dynasty or looking to sell him off, just be aware that he is at that level of advanced age. So this level of play may only last 2 to 3 years. That's important, I think, to be able to note. The next guy we talk about is Pascal Siakam, who, amazingly, I don't think there's anybody who would have expected this. That's not true. I don't think many people would have expected this at the start of the season, but he's the 3rd ranked player on the Raptors in fantasy value this season. At the start of the year, I did project Lowry to be the better fantasy player. That has come true, but Lowry and VanVleet have both ranked on a per game basis ahead of Siakam this season. Now, Siakam's still been great, 33rd ranked player, but because of the extra usage placed onto him, the increase in his scoring has been offset a little bit by the decrease in his efficiency and the decrease in his defensive numbers. It's very hard to maintain all of those things together, and one of the reasons he jumped up so much last year was that real big increase in efficiency, and that has tailed off, which is to be expected as usage goes up. It's a rare combination for a player that can get usage and efficiency to rise big amounts at the same time. That's not easy to do. Now, in terms of what Siakam did, 24 points in 36 minutes, 3.5 assists, 8 rebounds, over 2 threes, a steal, a block, 46 and 80. They're really strong numbers. Where can he get better? The efficiency can improve again, and maybe that does happen. The defensive numbers can come back, but again, with so much offensive focus on Siakam, that meant that defensive stuff needed to drop off. And maybe the assist can jump up to 4.5, 5, like a Chris Webber-ish type of number. I'm not quite there with Siakam yet. I think this is probably about our expectation for him moving forward. I think he's really good. I don't think he's necessarily this guy that can put everything together and be a 25 point per games guy with 1.6 steals and 1.4 blocks and hitting true shooting of 64%. I'm not really sure that he's necessarily that guy. But he can get better from the 56 true shooting he was at this season, push it to 58, 59, and that jumps him back to being that top 25 type of player. He, like VanVleet, is 26. He's actually a little bit older than VanVleet, a couple of months. So we're not talking about an extremely, it's not a 22-year-old. It's not 20-year-old Luka Doncic. He's 26. So he's heading into his peak. So we've got a 3-4 year window around this area. And then he's not that elite level player where it's necessarily going to last into the 32-33 age season. He's still obviously really, really good. And we've got 4 or 5 seasons probably of him at this elite type level. But dropping off is going to be something we do need to pay attention to with Siakam as we move forward. But some strong numbers there. Just probably didn't live up to a whole bunch of expectations that many had of him this season. But I think, and this is how my projections are never 100% accurate because it's literally impossible to do that. But this is sort of what I expected from from Siakam, and he's fit right into that area. Tell you how you can fit into an area of getting great tasting protein bars and potentially the worst segue ever, and that is by getting yourself some Built Bars. Built Bars are the best tasting protein bars ever. You take a normal protein bar, not only are they high in calories, but they taste like garbage. They taste like sawdust, like someone's poured dried concrete mix in there. That's not what you get with Built Bar. You get fantastic flavors, fantastic taste, 100% chocolate coating, all bars. 16 different flavors, and 8 of those are nut-free for those of you dealing with nut allergies. Their mint brownie bar, 15 grams of protein, only 110 calories. That is ridiculously low. 4 grams of sugar, 5 grams of net carbs there as well. With that mint brownie bar, peanut butter brownie is a higher protein bar as well, but still clocking in at under 200 calories. Ridiculously low in calories, unbelievably high in taste. And for you to try out Built Bar, we've got a great offer. If you head to builtbar.com and use the promo code on checkout, locked on, that's locked on, LOCKEDON, one word, you get $10 off your first order. And if you buy a box of bars, that's like 20-25% off. That is a fantastic deal to get yourself the best tasting protein bars ever. And once you taste Built Bar, you won't want to go back to any other type of protein bar. So go to builtbar.com, enter the promo code locked on, and save yourself $10 off your first order. Let's go to the next player on this list, and it is Stormin Norman Powell, who was obviously really, really good this season. Now, injuries set him back a little bit. He only played 44 games and played 29 minutes a game, and he's a hard one to get your head around. I loved him coming in as a second-round player. I thought this guy could actually be more impactful to winning on this squad than DeMar DeRozan. I guess the jury's still out a little bit on that one. DeRozan, some of his foibles have been thrust upon us in San Antonio. And of course, as soon as he left, mainly due to Kawhi and Danny Green arriving, the Raptors won. But Powell has shown an ability to be a very, very strong winning player. He's also had some absolutely shit-house seasons mixed in amongst that. Now, he's the 62nd ranked player this year in under 30 minutes a game. Why? Because his shooting has been super strong. 50% from the field, 40% from 3, and he hit 40% from 3 last year as well, 84 from the line. But he's not doing a huge amount else. The usage is way up. In fact, over his last 15 games, he was up to 25% usage and still doing it at a true shooting of 63%. Unbelievable efficiency. But low assists, low rebounds, they are some of the concerns. But at least he backs it up with some strong steal numbers. 1.3 on the year. High volume threes. Great efficiency. Good free throw rate as well. All of those things are very important to what VanVleet does. But there's still that level of concern I have. Go back 2 years. He shot 40% from the field. Yeah, that's a worry. Now, that was a weird season where he shot 29% from 3. As I mentioned, his numbers have been absolutely all over the place in his career. 40% as a rookie from 3. 32, 29, then 40, and then 40 again. So is he a 40% shooter or is he a shithouse 30% shooter? I think we lean more towards high 30s and 40s. The efficiency was really strong. He showed he can hold down that role. And again, when someone like Lowry does move on or retire, you're going to get most likely a Powell and VanVleet starting backcourt. Now, Powell is a little bit older again. Another 6 months or so older than VanVleet and Siakam. So we've got like 3-4 years here for him. Can he ever be into a top 30 player? I doubt it because I don't know what he does peripherally. Does he rebound or get assists? The steals maybe can push up, and instead of 29 minutes a game, maybe he plays 32 minutes a game and scores instead of 16 points per game, scores 21 points a game. In fact, in the last 6 games of the season, he played 33 minutes a game and averaged 23 points on a whopping 66% true shooting, and that was good for 37th. Still nothing else really coming there, but that absolute elite efficiency on high volume is what his calling card has been this season, and it's really impressive. I always have those worries though with players who are based on usage with high efficiency and not much else, because if something goes wrong, if there's a slight injury and his wrist goes weak, or he has a weird shooting season, or players pay more attention to him and the shooting falls off, how else is he contributing? That is the concern, I think, with him. Defensively, he's been pretty strong. Not great, but not terrible. PIPM is pretty good. VanVleet's and Siakam's also pretty good. I didn't mention those guys. Powell, interestingly, it was still a negative in the on-offs numbers, though. VanVleet was actually a bigger negative, minus 1.6. So there is still some, concerns. I'm not fully convinced, as much as I like the guy, I'm not fully convinced that he is this top 50 guy every season. I think he will have a top 40 season in his career, and that's going to come in that year where he does push and play as a 33, 34 minute a night starter. But whether that comes next season or the season after still does remain to be seen. But a huge year from Powell this year. He went from the 223rd ranked player to the 62nd ranked player. And it's not just because of minutes, it's largely because of minutes. But per 36 value, he went from 169th to 81st. Because he upped his usage up significantly, his steal rate increased, and his percentages and free throw rate increased. And they're not outrageously high where you go, that's a complete outlier, and he's got no way of being able to continue that. The man of many memes.
Hello there.
But what about scarves?
OG.
Balenciaga
Stop,
ones.
OG. You better stop, OG.
The Jedi, OG Anunoby. I think he's really good. I think he's a really good NBA player. His PIPM is super strong, plus 1.28. A bit of a negative offensively, but one of the best defensive players in the entire NBA. He's a plus 2.8 on-off for the season. Fantasy-wise, he was up and down. Now, he was the 88th ranked player this season, which is obviously really good. He played 30 minutes a night. Why was he ranked so highly? Well, it comes down to really one category, and that's steals, 1.4 per game. And he shot 51% from the field. There's a level of skepticism I have with his shooting. He went from a true shooting of 54 up to 60. His three-point shooting went from 33 up to 38. His two-point shooting improved as well, but he's not a good free throw shooter. 69% from the line.
Giggity.
So that level of shooting on that really low usage is a concern, because if it drops off, then a lot of his numbers fall off. 11 points, 5 rebounds, 1.3 threes, 1.6 assists. The only one of these numbers, or the only two of these numbers that are in the green for fantasy value, are his steals at 1.4 and his field goal percentage at 51%. If that field goal percentage goes back to where it was the year before at 45%, then he's not even a top 150 player. His per 36 numbers went from 370th to 221st. Now, that's obviously a big jump, but 221st in per 36 fantasy value is not super strong. And again, it's all coming on the back of steals and field goal percentage. And if the field goal percentage drops, I worry about the Jedi. Now, he's only 22. I think he's an absolutely fantastic NBA player. Again, one of the best defensive players in the NBA, and I'd probably have him close to an all-defensive team. But when we look at it for fantasy, hasn't brought it on a consistent enough basis. One thing I do like about him that we finally saw this year is blocks. Great shot blocker at Indiana, and it just never happened in his first 2 NBA seasons. He went from 0.2 and 0.3 blocks up to 0.7 blocks, and that's a key part as well. If he can hover around 0.7 to 1 block per game, do 1.5 steals, and then hit 1.5 threes, then he does have fantasy value. But I think his upside absolutely tops out because of the offensive limitations and that shooting concern I still have with him. Now, he's been good over nearly any split you can look at this season in terms of shooting. It's been really strong. Can it continue? I'd like to see it a little bit more than across 60 games, because the first 130 of his career weren't there, but often players in their third year take big steps up in terms of shooting. So there is a possibility it sticks. I think we look at him as a guy that can be a top 80 guy or a top 150 guy, but he's going to get starters minutes. He's going to help you in steals. I feel really confident about that. It's just where those other numbers come in. He's been wildly inconsistent as well this season in terms of some of the shooting numbers and usage numbers, and so many of his big scoring games come on unsustainably high shooting numbers. And he have like stretches of 4 games in a row of shooting 60+%, which you go, that's fantastic. And then he doesn't hit any shots for the next 3 games. And he's just all up and down. So we look at him as a steals type of guy, which has value, but it's not for everybody. And then hope those other numbers can come through and help us out as well. If you want to help yourself out, improve your knowledge, Blinkist is one of the best ways that you can do it. What Blinkist does is it gets all of the knowledge from non-fiction books. They've got an not unlimited library. They've got a huge library that you can access to get the key takeaway points either in written form or in audio form from thousands of non-fiction books. They distill all of that information down to 15-minute bite-sized chunks so you can... Don't worry about the faff, the fluff, all that nonsense in there. Get the key takeaway points from non-fiction books pushed straight into your head in just 15 minutes. You can get Upheaval, Turning Points for Nations in Crisis by Jared Diamond. You can get The Secrets of Power Negotiating by Roger Dawson. That and an unlimited access to read or listen to a massive library of condensed non-fiction books, all the books you want and all for one low price. And right now, for a limited time, Blinkist has a special offer just for our audience. Go to Blinkist.com/NBA, try it for free for 7 days and save 25% off your new subscription. That's Blinkist, spelled Blinkist, Blinkist.com/NBA to start your free 7-day trial. And you'll save 25% off also, but only when you sign up at Blinkist.com/NBA. All right, let's move on to the rest of these guys. Terence Davis, who was really impressive as a rookie. His advanced stuff was through the roof, plus 0.47 as an undrafted rookie guard who played over 1,000 minutes in his 64 games is super impressive. A plus 3.6 in his on-off is super impressive. He was the 242nd ranked player this season in fantasy. 17 minutes, 8 points. 1.4 threes, 46 and 87. That is a massive building block. A true shooting of 60%. Really strong. He played some point guard. Awesome. Where does he fit on this team? I think that's something of a concern moving forward. But when we're looking at dynasty value, I don't think that's really where we need to concern ourselves too much. The fact that, look, he started only 2 games this year. 22 points, 10 rebounds, 3 assists and a steal with 9 threes in those 2 games combined. His efficiency is through the roof. There's a little bit of the Norm Powers in that what do you do if you're not scoring? But he did show that ability to pass the ball a little bit. 3.5 assists per 36. It's not the greatest, but it's not terrible. I think he's got a massive future. Now, he is 23 years of age as a rookie, so that's somewhat of a downside. But he is a player that should be, even as early as next season, playing 22 minutes a night, I would guess, for this team. Can slot into that Norman Powell role and then become a starter in the future. I absolutely believe this guy is an NBA starter as we move forward. I thought there was a chance, even in the preseason, that they snuck him in as a Keith Bogan's 20-minute-a-night starter this year. But he has been super impressive in the times that he's been on the court. There's a lot more growth coming with Terence Davis, I believe, and I think he's going to have multiple top 100 fantasy seasons in the future. In fact, I would almost go and say he'll have at least one top 50 fantasy season. Now, I don't know when that'll be, probably in 5 or 6 seasons' time, but I can see that happening with him. We need to get a few more other things happening. The defensive numbers are a little bit low. We'd like a higher steal rate, but strong rebound rate, decent enough assists, good 3-pointers, strong usage, that's the word, really good true shooting. I wouldn't be sinking everything into the hope of him becoming this absolute stud moving forward, but there's absolutely, and especially compared to some of these other guys on this list, a ton of value there with Terence Davis as we move forward. Everyone loved this guy this year. The water boy, Chris Boucher. Marc Gasol went down. Serge Ibaka went down. Siakam was injured. It's got to be Boucher time. And he does put up numbers. We know that. The problem is those numbers don't necessarily always translate into on-court performance. He was a minus 2.5 this season for his on-off numbers, which is not good. Now, his PRPM was pretty strong, plus 0.83, but he gets pushed around so much. We know on a per 36 basis, his fantasy numbers are insane. 17 and 12, 2.6 blocks, 80% free throw shooter, a lot of free throw attempts. He hit 1.4 threes. And there's a lot of Christian Wood type comparisons with Boucher. But I'm not sure he's as good as Wood. And he's definitely not in a situation that's anywhere near as conducive. He's also 27 years of age, so we're talking about another guy who's got 2 to 3 years left. Now, there could be a big opening. Marc Gasol's 35, Ibaka's 31. Both those guys are free agents. What the hell are they going to do at this center position? But going by the way that Nurse treated Boucher this season, when both of those guys were injured and he still wouldn't start him or play him big minutes, that has to be a concern. He didn't start a single game this year, Boucher. That has to be a concern as to how he is viewed moving forward. I think that he's a player that, again, he's a per-minute monster. That's true. But per-minute monsters mean jack shit if they never actually get the minutes. And I fear that could be a problem with Boucher. So there's still a little bit of value. He's also a free agent coming up at the end of this season. There is a little bit of value in him from a dynasty point of view if you have him in trying to sell him off. The next Christian Wood is absolutely a way that you should be going with that in terms of trying to convince. I just don't have the room on my roster. Do you want him here? Hey, look, he's awesome. Per-minute monster, Gasol's, all those arguments are there that you can sell him off. I just don't believe that he's necessarily going to develop into a 27-minute-a-night guy, because if he does, he is a top 50 player. But getting to that number is the real challenge, and I don't actually see that being something that's going to be able to occur for the Waterboy, unfortunately. I want to throw this guy in there just for the sake of it because he is a player on this team and he's 24 years of age, and that's Pat McCaw. He is not good, and I don't know why Nick Nurse gives him so many minutes. His PIPM is disgustingly bad, negative 2.87. I will give him this. He's a really, really good defender. Throw out there, absorb minutes, but in terms of stats, he does nothing. 25 minutes a game, under 5 points. The 1 steal per game is useful. The 2 assists per game is useful as well from that position. I had some hopes for him coming in from UNLV, but he just hasn't been able to do anything offensively. He cannot shoot. And again, not a guy that I think we need to be looking at as any sort of long-term fantasy option at all. He's absorbing minutes. The advanced stuff will tell you that he shouldn't be. He's a negative 6.4 in his on-off. That is a really bad number. Like, really bad. PIPM doesn't tell you he's playing well. Traditional stats don't tell you he's playing well. But Nick Nurse tells you he's playing well. That's why he's getting minutes. I don't really see it happening in any other situation for Pat McCaw, unfortunately. The next 2 guys are mainly players that we saw in the G League, and that's Hernandez, who only played 12 minutes in the NBA this season. But he was the last pick in the draft, or 59th pick, I don't remember exactly, and dealt with some ankle injuries this season. In his 9 G League games, 29 minutes, 13 points, 10 rebounds, 2 blocks, 1.2 steals. He attempted 3 threes per game. Those 3 attempts didn't go well. He hit them at 15%. But this is sort of what he showed in college as well. An ability to stretch out, to be a little bit of a shooter, to be a strong rebounder, to get some blocks. He's a name to watch. And again, we talk about these centers like Gasol and Ibaka getting older. I'm not saying that Hernandez is going to be a starting center at all. He's 23 as well. But could he be a Bebe Nogueira type? Remember that bloke? That comes in, backup center, plays 20 minutes in a couple of years, gets 1.5 blocks and 7 rebounds. I don't think it's crazy to expect that from him, especially given Toronto's development system and where they can go from there. Now, a couple of guys on this team that I didn't include, Rondae, Hollis-Jefferson, and Stanley Johnson. Johnson was absolutely dreadful. Hollis-Jefferson had some moments, but I think we've seen so much of him. I just think we know sort of what to expect in terms of long-term value. The last guy I want to talk about is O'Shea Brissett. Again, a younger player. I think he's almost the youngest player on this roster. He is at age 21, almost 22. He did play 19 games for the big club, but most of his time was spent for Raptors 905. He played 30 games, averaged 15 points with 7 rebounds, 0.9 steals, and hit 28% of his threes. Like, they are not good numbers. Defensively, he's okay. I think he can be someone that you throw out there on wings. He's 6'8" with an ability to guard 2s and 3s. I wouldn't mind them developing into that Pat McCaw role and hopefully doing it a little bit better. But in terms of long-term fantasy upside, the rebounding is encouraging. Almost 7 a game in 28 minutes. That's okay, which translates to almost 9 boards per 36 minutes as a wing. That's pretty good. But what else is he doing? 19 points per 36, the 28% shooting, only 71 from the line. Like, there's nothing that's super interesting about him, but he is young. He is the youngest player on this team, and there is some ability there for him to be a rotation guy. So I thought he's just a name that you needed to be aware of, and just look at him as someone that maybe can come out there and do a job, but that doesn't necessarily translate into good fantasy value. That'll do it for me and talking about the Toronto Raptors and their dynasty value. Tomorrow is my first mock draft of the season. It is an NBA draft mock draft. It is not a fantasy draft mock draft because let me tell you now, if you're doing a mock draft for the 2020-2021 fantasy season, you are doing it wrong. It is literally impossible to do. I will never do a show like that until we actually know who gets drafted, what the hell happens with this season, when next season starts, when free agency occurs, because any information that gets provided by a mock draft now is misinformation. So when I say mock draft, it is the NBA draft, the 2020 NBA draft, LaMelo Ball, Anthony Edwards, James Wiseman, that sort of thing. So I'm doing a first round mock draft for that tomorrow. It's my first one of those. We'll do more of those as we move forward. So stay tuned for that, guys. Don't forget to subscribe, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and on YouTube. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.